All right, well, since it looks like everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and dive on in. First of all, welcome. Thank you for coming to the 2012 Contract Collector Training Seminar. Welcome to Portland. Welcome to the Wildwood Restaurant. We've got some good training lined up for you. Some history on Contract Collector. Next year we'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary. It was originally released in 1983. And 1998 was the first Windows release, and then in 2009 was the latest version 5 release. And in January, we released Lease Collector, which is a variation of Contract Collector for property management and servicing leases. A little bit of information about myself. My name is Michael Graves. I was hired by Comtronic Systems in 1998, and they were the original owners of the Contract Collector software and the original designers. They designed it in 1983. They sold the product in 2001 to a company called Winning Edge Software. At that time, I left Comtronic Systems, went with the product, and joined Winning Edge Software. And then in 2007, they decided to sell the product, and they offered it to me, and I purchased it and created Graveco Software, and that's where we are today. And so I have about 15 years of software development experience, all of which with Contract Collector. Okay, we're going to start off with the basic operating features of the software. In this session, we're going to quickly cover the toolbars as well as the main menu of the software. So when you first open the software, what you're going to see after you log in is across the top there's a main menu. This is your File, Edit, Client, Portfolio, Contract, Payment, Reports, GL, Code, System, and Help. As you click on each one of these, you'll get a menu list for that menu, and it will come up with the various sections that apply to that general menu topic. And so you can click on the contract window to open the contract window, and basically all of the functions of the software are available through that main menu. In Lease Collector, you see a slightly different menu. It includes, the only differences are the property menu and the lease menu. So to make that a little bit bigger for you, it's got the File, Edit, Client, Portfolio, Contract, Payment menu. And right below that is going to be your main toolbar. We'll come back to the main toolbar in just a little bit. As you open each of the windows, you'll notice that menu items are actually added to your top menu. When I opened the contract window, the navigation menu was added to the main menu. This navigation menu includes many functions for a data entry window, and so such as find, first, previous, next, and last, and your sorting functionality. And I can continue to open other data entry windows such as the portfolio window, the client window. And that's the great part about version 5 Contract Collector, is it allows you to do multitasking. You can even open multiple contract windows and be working in 2 contract windows, which is particularly helpful if someone calls with any questions while you're in the middle of working in another contract. And you'll notice that whatever screen is on top is the one that the functions are controlling. And so the main menu, if I choose to do a find, I'm going to be doing a find for a contract window because I'm currently in the contract window. That's the primary window. It's the one on top. If I open any of the reports, such as the contract report, another menu item is added to my main menu. That's the reporting. This, again, has all of the functions for doing your reporting. Preview, print, send it via email, save it to Excel or PDF. All of those reporting functions are added in that reporting menu. And similarly, if I open up a process, such as the auto charge process, Many of the processes also use the reporting menu as well because there's generally an audit report that will go along with each of the processes, such as the auto charge process or your client disbursement process and things like that. As I opened each one of these windows, you'll notice that another menu item, the window menu, was also added to your main menu. This window menu includes a couple of options such as the Cascade All and Arrange All. We generally don't recommend using those, particularly the Arrange All, unless you only have one or two windows open. It's going to be quite a mess on your screen. But if you have one or two windows open, there are some situations when you use it, but generally we don't recommend using those. What we do recommend is using the window menu to find the window that you've buried under this huge mess of windows. You know that you open one of your contract windows, you've lost it in the stack. This is going to be a good way to bring it to the top so that you can always find it in the stack of windows that you have open. Now that we've got a bunch of windows open, we'll talk a little bit about closing windows. There's quite a number of ways that you can close a window. Obviously, you can use the X that everybody's familiar with in the upper right-hand corner. We also have, under the File menu, the Close process. And again, notice each of these is closing the window that's primary on top of the stack that you're currently working in. Another option for closing a window is is on the main toolbar. We have the door with the arrow pointing out. We'll talk a little bit more about the toolbar in just a minute. But this close button will also close windows. We're also going to talk about the right mouse click in just a moment. And the right mouse click opens up a shortcut menu that includes a close option. And if that wasn't enough, we also have a close all option under your File menu that will close all your windows that you have open and send you back to a blank screen. And one last way to close a window that I just forgot is the escape key. And so if you're a keyboard user and like to use your keyboard, the escape key on your keyboard will also close the window. So there are plenty of means of closing windows when you want to clear your desktop or get those closed. I mentioned the shortcut menu. Each of our windows, every window in the software includes a right-click shortcut menu. So for example, in the portfolio window, I can do a right mouse click anywhere in the blank space between the fields, and that will open up my shortcut menu, which allows me direct access to many of the same items that are on your top toolbar, but directly associated with your window. And so many people will prefer these as opposed to using the main toolbar. As you can see, in this case, this is a data entry window, and so it includes your find, first, previous, next, and last. If I open up a report screen, such as the contract report, then the right mouse click shortcut includes all of your print functions: preview, print, save report as. And some data entry windows, such as your contract window, will include an extended list of options, which allows you really easy access to some other functions associated with the window. In the case of the contract window or lease window and contract collector, you've got your payment entry window, the statement of payments notice. These are common things that you're going to be running for just one contract, and this gives you direct access to doing that for this specific contract that you're viewing in the contract window. And finally, what you may see for the right-click shortcut in some screens, such as the notification dashboard, is just a close option for your right mouse click. Moving on to the toolbars. As you'll notice, there's 4 different toolbars that are used with the software. The first one is the main toolbar, which is always located right below your main menu when you open the software. And as you open each of the windows, the buttons on the toolbar will become available that are appropriate for that particular window. The first 12 buttons on your toolbar are all for your data entry windows. These are your find, your first, previous, next, and last, your save, cancel, delete. The next set of buttons on the toolbar are for reporting. These can be extended. Additional buttons can be added to the reporting section of the main toolbar, and we'll look at that in just a moment. And finally, the last button that applies to any window is the close button, which we also already talked about. So for your data entry windows, again, the first button is your Find button. This will open up your Find window, which we will talk more extensively about in an upcoming session. It basically just allows you to find a particular record, in this case, a particular contract, and open that record in your data entry window, in this case, the contract window. The next four buttons are your first, previous, next, and last, which are just used for scrolling through your records one at a time. The next button is your Sort button, which will allow you to sort the records in your data entry window. Then we've got the Calendar button, which we will also talk more about a little bit later. And then the next section are your New buttons, your Save button, a combination Save and New, which is used primarily with the payment entry window, also used with some data entry like in the contract window. If you're adding multiple contracts, it saves you an extra mouse click. The Cancel button, which is also commonly used as a refresh button. If you've made changes in another screen, such as the payment entry window, and are coming back to a contract window that you had open in the background, you're going to want to be comfortable using the Cancel button to update your display there so that you see the changes that were made in any other associated window. And then finally, the last button for data entry windows is the Delete button. For reporting windows, let me open up again the contract report. You'll notice a different set of buttons becomes available for any reporting window. Primarily, those buttons are going to be your preview and print. Email is also commonly used, and we'll look at some of the other ones a little bit later when we talk about some of the reporting features of the software. And then finally, the three other toolbars that you're going to see are the data entry toolbar, which allows you access to some of the primary data entry windows. All of these other toolbars can be moved to anywhere that's convenient for you to have in the software. You can have them docked along one of the margins, top, bottom, or the sides. You can have them undocked like this and move them around and just have them loose on your user interface. Or if you drag them to the sides, they will dock wherever you want to put them. We also have a toolbar settings window, which will allow you to bring them up if they're closed. It is possible to close them. And so when you open the software, if your user preferences, and we'll talk about user preferences a little bit later as well, if you don't have them set to come up, then they're not going to come up for you. Or if you do have them set to come up, they're going to come up in the place where you choose to have them. And so the software will remember where you put them and keep them wherever you choose to keep them. And so they should always be generally in the same place on your user interface, which will help you in finding them. The data entry toolbar allows you access to like the contract window for opening up the contract window instead of using your main menu. And the general toolbar has some options such as cut and paste. It has your help option for bringing up your help manual, which can be helpful. And some other options that are commonly used. And your reporting menu, reporting toolbar has some commonly used reports on that. So with that finishes our first section. Are there any questions so far? Very basic. We've kept it simple. We're going to build as we go. And one more comment that I can make, particularly in a multi-user environment, that cancel button is going to be particularly helpful if you're leaving windows open. Generally, it's a good idea in a multi-user environment to make sure that you're not keeping windows open any more than necessary. But if you do go to lunch, leave a window open, it's good practice to close it or use that cancel option to refresh it. If somebody else in the office entered a payment or did something else in that contract window, you'll want to make sure that you've got the latest information being displayed for you. So, if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and move on to the next section. Okay, in this section, we're going to be discussing some of the common controls that you're going to see in most of your windows, both data entry and in your reporting screens. The very first thing that you're going to see in many of the data entry windows are ID fields. So we'll start in the contract window. The contract window includes many ID fields. Generally, there are two types. There are your primary ID, which is always going to be in the upper left-hand corner. It's the ID that identifies the record that you're on, and it uniquely identifies it. And so you're not going to be allowed to have duplicates of that ID, and it's always going to uniquely identify this particular data entry record. The other type is foreign ID fields, generally just called ID fields. Those are going to be IDs that tie into usually other windows, such as your portfolio ID for a unique record in your portfolio window, the contract type for a unique contract type record in your contract type code window, and so forth. The status is an ID field, and there's a number of other ID fields throughout the contract window, which we will see a little bit more of later. But the important part to recognize is that each of these ID fields always have certain functions available for you. The F2 function will always bring up your find. If you're a mouse user, it's the right mouse click to bring up your find. And every ID field except the primary ID field will also have drill down capabilities, which is with your keyboard the F3 key, or with your mouse the double click. That will bring up the associated data entry window for that particular ID record. In this case, again, the contract type. If you wanted to create a new contract type, you can use that drill down, start a new record with your new button, and create your new contract type, and then use that in the contract window. It's a really good feature for navigating the software using that drill down to get to where you want to go. And we will also, again, talk more about the finds a little bit later on. Another common field that you're going to see throughout the software on reports is your pick lists. These are a combination of fields that generally have the word all in the ID field and then include a list of selected IDs. There's a couple different ways of adding records to your list. The first is just by typing them in. If you know the ID, you can type in the ID and press Tab or Enter, and it's going to add that ID to your list. And so I can add multiple IDs to my list if I know what they are. And to remove an item from my list, I simply type it in again. And so if I type in 002 again and press Tab, that removes it from my list. Or if I type in the word all, that will remove them all and set me back to the general where we're doing it for all of the IDs. And in this case, we're working with a portfolio ID, which will always indicate what type of list we're working with. And so this one here is obviously a contract type list, and so it's looking for me to type in contract types. If you don't know your IDs, you can always use the find. So again, with your find, that's going to be your right mouse click, and that will open up your find window, or a selection window in this case, and allow you to select multiple records, say OK, and it will return those IDs back to your list. You've also got drill down capabilities with these pick lists. I can use my double click to drill down to any of the items in my list. And so in this case, I brought up portfolio 003 just by double clicking on that item in the list. Your F3 also works from the ID field, and so I can press my F3 and it will open up that portfolio window from the ID portion of that pick list. For some or for all of the portfolio pick lists, we also have, along with the F2 functionality and F3 for drill down, we have F8 capability. What F8 is your group selection. We'll look at your portfolio groups a little bit more later, but this allows you to select a grouping of your portfolios, and it's going to populate your list with all of the portfolios that are in that group. And so if you're working with a portfolio list and you have groups, that might be a very helpful way of bringing up a subsection of your portfolios. And finally, most of the pick lists will also include a selection drop-down list. This selection drop-down list allows you the ability to basically change what kind of pick list you're working with. And so in this case, I have two options: the portfolio, which is what we're currently on, or specific contracts. So notice if I change it to specific contracts, the caption up above changes to contract ID. We're now working with a list of contract IDs in our pick list instead of portfolio IDs. You can't do both. You have to choose one or the other. But in most cases, you wouldn't really want to do both. Another common field that you're going to see throughout the software are date fields. These date fields allow different functionality as well, including the F2 and your right mouse click for a date find. And so it will open up a date find window, a calendar that will allow you to easily select a date, say OK, and it will fill in that date field with that value. Date fields also have, besides the F2, a bunch of keyboard shortcuts associated with them. Ones that are used commonly, there's quite a number of them, but the one that's used most common is maybe the equal sign, which will always bring up today's date. So instead of needing to know what today's date is or bring up a calendar to figure it out, you can always just use the equal sign key, which is a really easy way of always getting today's date in there. The other keyboard shortcuts are your greater than and less than symbol, which will change the date one date at a time using the less than symbol one day less. Or if I use the greater than symbol, it will go one day forward. And so we can navigate one day at a time. If I use a lowercase letter m for month, that takes me always to the first of the month that's being displayed for that date. Capital letter M will take you to the last day of the month, and lowercase y to the first day of the year, capital Y to the last day of the year. Another common field that you're going to see throughout the software, obviously, are numeric fields. Numeric fields are obviously looking for a numeric value, and sometimes require that you do a calculation on that value. And so here in the payment entry window for your payment amount, I can use the F7 key on the keyboard, which is going to bring up an associated calculator for this field. I can easily multiply this number by 2 to come up with what their double payment amount would be if they want to make 2 months of payment. Return that value to my screen, and it's going to do that calculation for me. It saves you from having to use any other calculators that you might have. If you're not in a numeric field, such as the ID field up here, and you use your F7, you get a disassociated calculator or a general calculator that you can use. This isn't tied to any numeric field. It just allows you to do a calculation if you can't find your calculator on your desk. Some other common fields that you're going to see throughout the software are grids. And there are 3 different types of grids that you're going to see used throughout the software. Read-only or display grids, direct data entry grids, and indirect data entry grids. The first, and probably the most common, are going to be your read-only grids, such as in the portfolio window, we have a contract listing. And so this is information about all the contracts that have been assigned to this portfolio. This grid is read-only. You obviously have to enter your contracts in the contract window. This is simply a display for your purposes of seeing what contracts are in this portfolio. One of the many benefits of grids is that you can use the drill down features then to navigate directly to this contract window, make changes here, which will then affect the display-only grid that's displayed over here. Another very common read-only or display grid that you'll see is the ledger. You can't make any changes directly to the ledger grid. You can use the Edit Ledger button to add ledger items, but the grid itself is read-only. Another type of grid that you're going to see are direct data entry grids. This includes, for example, your phone grid. And so this grid does allow you to input records directly here into this grid. The trick to adding any records to a data entry grid is going to be the down arrow key on your keyboard. You can't directly click into any blank record on that grid. The only way to get in there is to down arrow from the last record that is being displayed. And so that's a common pitfall for particularly new users, is that they don't understand how to get into that field, and it is a little bit different. So just remember that down arrow on your keyboard is the trick. Another example of a data entry grid is that portfolio groups grid on the portfolio window. That's going to be a direct entry grid. And also in all of the receivables windows, those are direct data entry grids, with the exception that as soon as it's been saved, it becomes read-only. And so once you can add new lines to your each of the receivables grids, but once that's been saved, it does become read-only. And so there are some slight variations on these grids. And then finally, we have the indirect data entry grid. What you're commonly going to see in these grids is that there's a record selected with a yellow line. That's the yellow line that you're currently editing. And so in this case, Ernie Johnson in the indirect names grid is selected, and his record is the one that we're editing in the fields below. And so any indirect data entry grid will always include a set of fields below the grid for you to make changes to that record. And generally, there are a lot more options below the grid than what's actually being displayed in the grid. As you can see here, there's many different options, and only some of them are identified in the grid above for you to identify your record and select which one you want to make changes to. And finally, in discussing some of the features of most all grids, we have the find capabilities that we've talked about already, the F2, and particularly the drill down for accessing through any of the ID fields. All of the date fields for your any data entry grid, such as your payment interest schedule. These are date fields, and so again, you can use your F2 functions to do a date find to populate these date fields in a grid. And probably most importantly with your grids is your sorting capabilities. If you do a double left mouse click on any of the headings up here, it will sort by that column. And so I can sort by the date column. I can sort by every one of these columns and choose to sort it by that. That can be really helpful, particularly here in the ledger where you've got a large number of entries. You're looking for something in particular, and it's hard to find. Sorting the grid will make it easier to find. And if you've already sorted a column by it, if you double click on it again a second time, it will sort it in descending order. And so that may be useful if you need that. And also, particularly for any of the data entry grids, you will notice that there's a little white cell, if you will, on the left-hand side of each of these grids. The phone grid has one as well that allows you to delete records. And so if you wanted to delete a particular phone record, you can click on that white cell, and it will ask you to confirm, do you want to delete that record? If you say yes, it will mark that record for deletion with a little black mark, and then pressing save will delete that record. And you'll also notice in this particular case there's a record indicator. The yellow line is indicating what record you're on, as well as the little chevron arrow in the record indicator column. And finally, one of the last controls that you'll see very common to most data entry windows is your address phone options. Obviously, the phone information allows you to add both email, phone, fax, cell phone numbers for each of your records. In this case, borrowers. You can include all of their contact information. And the address tab allows you to input their address information. Using the edit button or the pen on this toolbar for your addresses will open up the address window, which will allow you to make any edits to this address that you may need to make. You can have multiple addresses associated with each of your records. In this case, again, the contract borrower record. So if they move, you can keep a history of where their past addresses were. This can be helpful in skip tracing and other reasons why you may want to know where they previously lived. So you can keep those. If you get mail returned, you can use that checkbox. The important thing to remember is that you can only have one primary mailing address. That will be the one that's in slot number 1 of your addresses. And so all of your reports and letters are going to use whatever address you've got designated as their primary address, which will always be the one that comes up first. One other quick comment on this address window. It allows you to specify, obviously, a description for that address, which you can use that drop-down list to select. But this is a editable field, and so you can type in, for example, let's go Ernie's mailing address. And maybe Betty has a different mailing address, and so you need to keep different addresses for both of them. You can certainly save that as his description. It's still the address in slot number 1. It's going to be the one used as the mailing address, but that description is completely editable for your needs. You can put anything you want in there. The drop-down list is just for your convenience. So again, find windows are something that you're going to see all the time associated with your ID fields throughout the software. Once again, these ID fields are both your primary ID fields, which again are always the ID field in the upper left-hand corner of all of your data entry windows. The find functions are also available for your foreign ID fields. In the case of the contract window, your portfolio ID, your contract type, also have find capabilities associated with them. One very important distinction that you will find is what happens particularly in a primary ID field versus any other ID field when you do a find. Again, there are many different find options that you can choose from. Just like closing a window, there's a dozen different ways that you can use to do a find. Particularly for your primary record find, which will be to find a new record for that data entry window, or find actually an existing record that you want to bring up. If you're a keyboard user, again, if you're in that ID field, you can use the F2 key to bring up your contract find. If you're not in that ID field and you're a keyboard user, you can use Control F on your keyboard. That's going to bring up, again, the primary record find. If I select from here and say OK, it's going to bring up that record in the contract window that I chose. And again, if I'm anywhere else other than that primary ID field, I can use the Find button, which will again bring up the record find so that I can select a record and bring up that record in the contract window. Other options, if you're a mouse user, of course, in the ID field, you can do your right mouse click to find a record and bring up that record in the contract window. And of course, again, your right mouse click shortcut to do a find for a record find. The distinction is that if you're in any other ID field, for example, the portfolio ID, and you use your F2, you're now doing a different kind of find. This is going to change the value of this field. It's not going to change the record that you're on. So right now, this contract is assigned to portfolio 003. If I do my find, select a record, and say OK, we've now changed the value of that field for this record. And so the record didn't change. We stayed on the same record, but we changed the value of that field. Same thing, I can change the contract type using my F2 or right mouse click, and change the contract type to something else, say OK, and then save my changes. In this case, I'm going to cancel. I don't want to save those changes. But notice the difference between a record find or changing the value of a field, and it just depends on which type of ID field that you're in. The components to any find window, whether it's a record find or a field find, is that you've got a criteria section up on top, which allows you to narrow down your search. You have a research results list, or grid, and again, this goes by all of the grid features that we talked about earlier, such as your column sorting, your record or your search results list, and then below that we have a search mode option, which allows you to change your search mode. So the first thing are the search modes at the bottom. There are 2 checkboxes, but there are really 3 different search modes that you may be operating in. The first one is incremental search. With incremental search checked, your search results list is being redefined with every keystroke that you type in. And so if I type in the letters J-O here in the name, my search result list changes with each keystroke to match those results. If I go farther and type the H for John, Joyce will disappear, and my search result list changes with each keystroke. This can be really beneficial for small finds. If you've got tons and tons of records, you may find that the incremental search is just too slow. You don't want to wait for, you know that you want to type in the name John, you don't want to wait for each letter to update your list. It's just taking too long. So let me delete that out of there. Whoa. Again, my mouse is freaking out. There we go. So if we have incremental search turned off, this will bring up what we call basically field search. And so this will allow you, as you complete each field, to run the search. And so if I type in John and then press Tab or Enter, at that point in time, my search result list will update with those changes. And so each one of these fields up here in your search criteria, it will wait for you to complete that field and for you to press Tab or Enter before it will update your list for the results that match. And finally, if you've got a really, really huge database, which honestly I've never really seen too much, is we do have a suspend search option. What this will do is it will condense your find window to just your search criteria. It will allow you to type in all of your search criteria here at the top. So again, I can specify just the letters J-O and then and portfolio 001. And then say query when I'm ready, and then it's going to update your list with the ones that match that criteria. So it's going to wait until you're ready to actually perform the query. Again, that's useful if you've got really huge databases. I've never really seen the need for that too much with most users. So I'm going to go back to incremental search here. The next thing, like I was saying, is the search options, which is your list right here, which is either exact, like, or nickname. You'll notice when it's unexact, it's looking for you to match each of these fields exactly. If I type in John here, again, I only get those records that start off exactly with the first name of John. If his name was Jonathan and spelled J-O-N, he would not be in this search result list. He did not match exactly with the search criteria that I was looking for. The next option is your like option. And if I change this to like, notice that two things happen. Number one, we turn off the incremental search, and there's a reason why that's automatically turned off for you. And now we're searching like, so anywhere that John is within the name, it's going to show up. And so we get James Johnson because John is part of his last name. We get John Smith as well as Ernie and Betty Johnson because, again, John is part of their last name. So again, like now here is working really well as a last name search for finding records in the find window. And the other thing that you will see with the like search is that it's also a sounds like search. So if I type in Smith, whoa. If I type in a last name of Smith, in this case my incremental search was turned off, so I had to press tab. I'm going to turn it back on. I get a last name that's spelled S-M-Y-T-H. It's a rare variation of the name Smith, but it does come up. And if someone calls in and says that their last name's Smith, you type them in, you may not know that it was spelled S-M-Y-T-H. And so that's why we turn incremental search off for you when you choose the like, is because of the sounds like part of it. It's possible you would type in SM and a lot of your search results would go away. You type the I and a lot of the search results come back. And so your search results list jumps all over the place because of the sounds like, which can be a little obnoxious. If you get the no search results found, you kind of stop at that point. But if you went a little bit farther, some search results might have come back. So that's why that's turned off with the like search options. You can, like you see here, turn it back on and force it. But generally it's turned off. And finally, there we go, is the nickname search. Nickname allows you a little bit more flexibility. Someone may call in and say their name is Bob. You've got them in the system as Robert. Maybe their first name is John or Jonathan. You don't know how it's been entered into the software or how it's spelled for that matter. So with the nickname search, you can type in Jonathan, and you're still getting the name John as your search result, and vice versa. If you typed in John, then any Jonathans would still be in your search result list as well. Other search criteria. You do have this drop-down list, which really allows you complete flexibility of searching anything within the database. And so we've got a limited number of search criteria that we have chosen in each of your find windows here at the top. In this case, the name, portfolio ID, contract type. We feel that these are generally what you might be searching on. If you need to search on something else for some other reason, such as maybe the tax ID, you're trying to find them by their tax ID, you can use that option. If I type in 441, again, my incremental search is on, so the list updated with each keystroke that I typed in, and now we found that that belongs to probably Kevin Adams. So we can find off of any database field in the software, just depending on what you know and what you need to look for. And finally, the last thing is the UDF search. We'll talk a little bit more about UDF fields in a moment as well, but this is all of your user-defined fields. And so if you need to search on, for example, the employer, which is one of the user-defined fields, you can bring up the employer as your UDF search criteria and then type in an employer such as Kmart. And it's going to bring up your borrowers that match that search criteria as well. And so the searches are really a very powerful field, very powerful option for you. There's really lots of different things that you can use it for to find what you're looking for. Selection windows are a slight variation of your finds. Any of your reporting windows are generally going to use a selection option instead of a find option specifically. Find options allow you to select one record. Your selection options allow you to select multiple records. And so with any of the selection windows, again, I've got all of my search criteria to narrow down my list. But then I can select multiple records. It will mark each one that I've selected with your chevrons. I can then say OK, and in this case, it's going to populate my pick list with the records that I've chosen. You've noticed, if you were paying attention there are a few other options that are available in a selection window. In this case, I'm doing a contract selection. We have the select all and unselect all options at the bottom. This allows me to easily select all of the records that are being displayed. What that allows me to do is I can specify just one portfolio and then say select all and say OK, and it's going to fill in my list with all of those options. You notice there was also an unselect all option. You can use that as well, which will obviously just unselect everything that's been selected. And the other difference is this advanced search checkbox. This goes way beyond the scope of this training today, so we're going to skip over this, but it can be useful. You'd be probably working with technical support at this point if you needed to do this type of search. So for some search techniques that you can use in the software, again, using the contract find, we already saw that if you're looking for a last name, the like search is going to be very helpful for doing a find for a particular last name. So again, if I type in John, and my incremental search is off because I'm a like search, so I press tab, it's going to bring up everybody that's last name is Johnson, as well as the first names are John as well. So that's one technique of doing a last name search. The other one, if you're on an exact search, and I'm going to turn on the incremental, is using the sort name. As you set up each of your contract records, the sort name is defined for you automatically, usually as last name first. And so if you use the other search criteria and again type in John for Johnson, now I'm not getting anybody whose first name is Johnson, but I am getting, or John, but I am getting those that have a last name that start off with those letters. And finally, as I mentioned before, all of your grid functions, such as the double click, can be used to sort your records in your search result list. Again, this can be helpful for finding a particular last name. Now it's alphabetized by this sort name list. I can find the name a little bit easier and bring it up in my contract window. All right, the next session that we're going to work on today is the user-defined fields, or UDFs, as they're commonly called. User-defined fields allow you the ability to store information that's not natively tracked elsewhere in the software, but may be very important for your operation. We looked earlier at employer information. Employer isn't something that Contract Collector tracks natively. But if that's important for your business, then you can add that as a user-defined field. And these are also things that are not going to be tracked in any generic notes field or a calendar entry. And we'll look at calendar entries a little bit later, but basically those are going to be anything that's date sensitive. And so if you're working with something that you need to track that you want to put on a report or do fines off of, or just track for your business needs, you may want to consider using a user-defined field for that purpose. Basically, all of the major data entry windows in the software allow you to enter user-defined fields for them. And so along with your contract loan information, you may want to set up user-defined fields for your vendors or for your banks. Maybe even your client information if you want to store user-defined fields for them. User-defined fields are going to be set up in your UDF setup window, which is located under your system menu, setup submenu, and your user-defined field setup window. This will open up, again, a data entry window for you to input your user-defined field that you need to keep track of. And so, for example, to start a new record in here, I'm going to press the New button up on the toolbar and input what I want to use as the primary ID field to identify this record. I'll then put in a caption, which is what's going to be displayed on the UDF tab of the particular window. And we'll just use field number 1 for this generic example. You then choose your file type, which is what window you want it to be in. And so we can choose the contract window. I'm going to go ahead and choose the client window in this case. And then you set the field type. There are quite a number of field type options. And this is going to be the type of data that you want to store. If you're storing a date or text or maybe just a true-false checkbox field, this is where you're selecting what that type is. And those include, again, character, date, logical, which is your true-false checkbox, a memo field, which is unlimited text, numeric, integer, currency, date time, or a file UDF. So I'm going to choose character, and I'm going to set the length to 50. And I'm going to save that entry, again, using the Save button up on my top toolbar to save that user-defined field. And so now if I open up my client window and go to the UDFs tab, you will see that UDF that we just created, which will now allow me to input a value in there. And it's a character field, so it's alphanumeric. I can plug in anything that I want to store. Again, save changes after I've made my changes, and now that information has been saved on that particular client record. We've got that value saved. Again, there are quite a number of field types that you can use, and each of those field types allow you to store various information or information types. For example, here in the bank window, I've set up one of each type. This is a 50-character field, and so it allows me to specify up to 50 characters in this field. Once I reach that limit here, which will happen eventually, you'll notice I stop. And so now if I keep trying to type, I'm just overwriting that last character. I'm limited to that number of characters in this 50-character field. A memo field is similar. It's alphanumeric. You can pretty much type in any characters, including symbols, that you may want to type in, but it's unlimited. And so it's going to keep going and going and going and will never stop. To demonstrate that, I'm going to cancel my changes here, go to a blank record here in the bank window. And I have a popular poem here by a poet called Robert Frost. It's The Road Not Taken. You might have heard of it. We can paste that into the memo field and save that. And if I then go run a report, in this case, it's going to be the bank report. We will talk about advanced reporting here a little bit later, but what I'm going to do is just remove some of these extra fields. I'm going to go down and add that memo field from our user-defined fields and preview this report. And you will notice that there is that poem by Robert Frost for the entire contents of that field. And so it's truly an unlimited field if you need to store lots of information for a character base field. Real quickly, the date fields function just like a date field anywhere else in the software. If you press F2, you get a date calendar find. You can select your date and say OK. Same thing is true for the date time field. I can use F2. I can also use the equal sign on my keyboard. That's going to fill in today's date and today's time. And so that's the time at this moment using the keyboard shortcut for the equal sign. I also want to spend a few minutes on the file type. Actually, before I do the file type, the numeric, again, functions like any other numeric field. You can use your F7, and that brings up an associated calculator for that field. I can use my calculator to come up with a value, press return, and it will fill it in that numeric field. And so you've got all of the same numeric functionality. One thing you will notice with currency, it is going to put your dollar sign on there and force you to 2 decimal places. Numeric fields allow you to specify the decimal place, and so if you need 3 or 4 decimal places, you would want to use numeric. Moving back to my file data type, this is really powerful because it allows you to tie files directly with your records. In this case, it's a bank record, and so maybe you have a bank reconciliation that you want to store as a bank file or anything like that. Moving back to this record here, we've saved the help CHM file. And so you can always select a file. Let me go to a blank one here. If I use my F2 key on the keyboard for this file type, it will bring up an open file dialog. So I can go out, I can select my file, say OK, and it's going to store that file name in that file UDF field. This also allows me the ability, I will save that change. It also allows me the ability to open that file. And so right from the software, I can open that file with just a double left mouse click or drill down effectively on that file field. And so again, moving back to this one, this is our help file. So if I double click on that, it's going to open up our contract collector help. And so again, really powerful if you've got Excel records or Word documents that you want to tie to a specific contract record. You can open them directly from the software. It really allows you to somewhat go paperless to some extent and tie everything to direct records. And the number of UDF fields are also unlimited. If you have more than what will fit on one page, for example, here in the contract window, if I go to the UDFs tab, there have been lots and lots of UDFs that have been set up here. What the software will do is it will just start adding subtabs like you see here, page 1, page 2, page 3. And so the number of UDFs are really unlimited. At some point, there does become a practical limit for your ability just to manage these UDFs if you've got too many. So adding pages and pages of them probably isn't recommended. You're not going to be able to find them. But there are some circumstances where you may need to have them. You just set them up once and you're done. And then those all print on, for example, a contract that you need to print. And so it's got information such as their employer and other dates that are important for your contract that you need to keep track of and have printed on that contract. Set them up in the UDFs tab so that they'll be able to be used elsewhere in the software, such as on that printout for your contract. We also looked at this a little bit already, but all of those UDFs are searchable. So again, we can do a find, and I can search off of the student SSN and type in a number, and it's going to find the SSN for that student that we're looking for if you're doing student loans. Again, you probably wouldn't use the student SSN because we already have a field for that natively within the software, but there again may be a circumstance for it. And also, as we recently looked at, you can put all of those UDFs on your reports. And so if I go to my contract report and bring up the advanced options, which again we will talk more about this a little bit later. I'm going to go ahead and remove a couple of these columns just so that we don't have so many. And then I'm going to go down here to my user-defined fields, which are right there. And so there's my student SSN. I'm going to add that as well as the enroll date. And then if I preview this report, you'll notice that those columns now come up on this report. And so they're fully reportable. Again, really convenient if you need to track information that is important to you, but not necessarily tracked anywhere else. in this particular session, I'm going to be operating in the Enterprise Edition of Contract Collector. Enterprise Edition is simply a combination of the lease collector software as well as the contract collector software in one package. I will be discussing some features that are applicable to both programs, and so that's why we're using this. And so you'll see your main menu now includes a few more options, such as the automobile menu, property, as well as the contract menu, all in one program. So along with the user-defined fields, the software also allows you to store images and PDF files specifically with one contract record. This can be really useful for particularly collateral for your loans if you want to have a picture of what that collateral is. Store that information, particularly if it's a property or something like that. Or in the case of lease collector, if it's a property that you're renting out, you may want to have photos of before the tenant moved in of what that property looked like, so that should they make damages or do damage to the property, you will be able to know that after they move out. So in Contract Collector, again, all of our primary data entry windows, including the contract window, include an Images tab, which has the ability of storing, again, your photos of your collateral for your properties, if you're doing auto loans for the cars that you're collecting these loans on. Some of the data entry windows, particularly in Lease Collector, such as the unit window under Property menu, will have images directly on the Details tab as well as the Images tab. And so it allows you some of the flexibility right there on the Details tab for viewing what that unit or automobile, if you're doing, again, auto loans, pictures of the automobile that you may be selling if you're an auto dealership. To add an image, you simply need to use the Add button that's on the screen. That's going to open up an open dialog box for you to select which image that you want to store. And in this case, I'm going to choose a scanned document that we have, which in this case is a lease, and tie that to this record. I can put a caption on it so that I can identify what that image is for, and then again save my changes. Whoops, it jumped me there. But if I scroll through them, there's that lease document that's been added by using that Add button. Same thing for adding a PDF file. Use the Add button. You need to this time select that we want all file types, because a PDF file isn't technically an image file. So then I scroll down or navigate to wherever the PDF document might be. And in this case, I've got a Nelco PDF that I'm going to select here. And it's going to bring up that PDF document here for me and views what that PDF document is right on the screen. And so this is where using this might be a little bit better for PDF and image files as opposed to using a file user-defined field, is because you can actually view the document here, whereas in the UDF tab, you only got a file name that you have access to and not a view of the document. You'll notice there's a couple different view options. You can view in 1x, which allows you basically just to view one image on your screen. And so I can, again, using the scroll buttons, scroll through my images here one at a time. It's displaying one. If I choose the 3x, then it's going to put 3 images on the screen. And if I choose the 6x, then I've got up to 6 images. If I have 6 images, in this case I only have 5, and so the 6th one is blank. But it's displaying all those images for you there. If you've got a ton of images or a ton of PDF documents, you can use the Find button to find the particular image that you're looking for. And again, it's bringing up the caption here for you to select the caption. and if that identifies it for you, and then say OK, and it's going to bring you up to that record. I was viewing all of them, so that wasn't particularly exciting there. Let me do this, and if I then choose this PDF document and say OK, it's going to jump me to that record in the Images tab. You can also open images directly from here. And so if I go back to this image, if I want to see it bigger, in this case it's not going to get much bigger, but if I wanted to see it bigger, I could double click on it, again using kind of the drill down functionality, and then I can increase the size of it here, zoom in and out. Basically it's going to open that file in whatever program you would open it in if you were to double click on the file elsewhere in Windows. And so basically it just launches the file, and so whatever program for you is appropriate for opening that file is what it's going to default to. If it's a PDF file, I can open those as well. In this case, in the 1x view, the only way to open it in Adobe PDF is to click on the print option. There we go. It will open Adobe Reader in this case, and we'll open this in here just as if I double-clicked on the file. This allows me a few more options that I don't have directly within Contract Collector to manipulate this document, including being able to print it. If you're in 3x or 6x view, you notice your PDFs are now defined as an icon. If you double-click on them, again, your drill down, it will open up that record in Adobe PDF. You can also just select it and then hit your printer icon. Same thing, it will open up that document in Adobe PDF or your appropriate PDF reader. Printing images. If we're on an image file here and I want to print this particular image of my collateral and I hit the printer icon, it opens up a print image dialog box, which allows me to set a couple of report titles. I can then choose if I want to print all images, or it's going to default to just printing the one that I had selected. Or I can print all selected images, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But if I just go ahead and say preview on this, let me change this to the large report ID, and then preview, it's going to bring up a preview of this image. And so if I were to send it to paper, this is what's going to come out on paper to print this image. Going back to my unit window, the Images tab, if I choose my printer icon, I can then specify again some report titles, such as, we'll go Unit B, and then I'm going to say Photos. And I'm going to choose to print all selected images, and say I'm going to also change this to now the small report ID, hit preview, and it's going to print all of those images, 8 to a page in this case, with your captions printed below each of the images and the captions that I chose for my titles. You will notice we asked it to print all of the selected images. You have to be in 6x view in order to select which images you want to print. This is the only view that includes the checkboxes, so you can choose which images are technically selected. Saving those changes, it's going to remember which ones are selected, which ones aren't, so that you can always just print the ones that you want to print. Finally, in printing PDFs, let me go back to the contract window here. If you're in 1x view, you can print these a couple of different ways. If your version of PDF Reader brings up this hover toolbar, you can use the print option here to send it right to your printer. If it doesn't, commonly you should be able to do a right mouse click and choose print, and that will send it to your printer. I don't have a printer here today, so I'm not going to be printing anything today. But if I were to choose that option, I could send it to my printer with a typical printer dialog box. Finally, deleting an image. You may need to remove an image. And this is that Nelco PDF that I just added. I'm going to delete that one. And it gives you the typical confirmation message. Are you sure you want to delete this? I say yes. We've now removed that document. Same thing, if it's not a PDF file, it's still going to delete it. Now we're deleting this image. Do I want to delete it? Yes. And it's gone, and it just, again, keeps taking me to the last image that's on file. Speeding right along, that's the end of that session. Any questions on images? Okay, good, a question. That's a good question. Her question was, if the file is on a multi-user environment and it's not specifically, in a multi-user environment, if you save the file and other people need to access that same file, are they going to be able to? Is that fair? Okay. The answer to that question is it does depend. If everybody's network is set up the same way, then yes. It is going to save that path in such a way that if everybody's path is the same and everybody has access to that image, then yes, they will be able to access that image. If their network is set up slightly differently, then it may or may not be. What Contract Collector actually saves is just the last part of the path in accordance to the software. And so you will notice that I was using that images folder, which is within the data folder of Contract Collector. Just to show that real quick, if I navigate out here, you'll see that I'm in the images folder, which is under data, which is in the Contract Collector 5 folder. And so since I'm working in that images folder, all the software is saving is the relative path to that images folder, which is going to be the same for everybody. And so everybody's going to have that images folder. Everybody has the data folder because they have the software. So they're able to access the software. The images folder is in the same place for everybody. And so that relative path will work for everybody. However, if when I'm saving that image, I go out here and I choose my desktop, and I choose an image from my desktop to save, that's going to be different for everybody. My desktop is different than what it is on everybody else's computer. That path isn't going to work for anybody else. And so you will want to be careful where you're saving these image files to and putting them in a place that other people have access to so that everybody can access these image files, definitely. Good. On a server in a shared, yep. Or just within, again, using the Contract Collector data folder, keeping them in there. May not be the best thing to do in all circumstances. If you're doing lots and lots of images, you don't want that data folder getting huge for backup reasons, and so using somewhere else might be beneficial, sure. All right, calendars. Similar to your images, your calendars are also available in pretty much all of your major data entry windows. Again, including your contract window, lease window, as well as pretty much, again, all of your other major data entry windows. I do want to emphasize the user window, and we will discuss that a little bit more in here in a moment. That is particularly powerful in how you can use the software, particularly if you're a manager and you have other users using the software to give them reminders or tasks for a particular day. But we will look at that in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and log into Contract Collector. And you'll notice, again, in each of the major data entry windows, we have either a contact log tab, which contains the list of date-sensitive calendar contact information for this particular record. In some instances, such as the portfolio window, you'll see it as a calendar notes tab instead of a contact log tab. The nomenclature is a little bit different depending on which window you're in, but they're all basically the same as far as what they're intending to do, store date-sensitive calendar information. All of these, again, you'll notice, are used in a grid, and so again, all of our grid functions fall into play. If I want to sort this grid based on the priority, I can double-click on that priority column, and it will sort the grid on that column. If I want to sort it by description, or if I want to sort it by date, which will be the default, it will sort by date by default. You can do that directly using the grid. Drill down, again, is also going to work, and so if I want to bring up this calendar entry in the calendar window, or the contact task manager as it's properly called, using the double click will bring it up. I can also double click on any of the descriptions, and so because it might be a little bit easier for you to find what you're looking for and double click on that description, that will bring up the same thing as double clicking on the date. So again, using the drill down to bring up a particular calendar record in the calendar window. Drill down also works on the user, and so if you need to bring up the user window for that record, again, to make some important notes, and we'll talk about the user calendar in just a moment, the drill down works for that. And finally, the other option that you've got directly here is the ability to delete any of these records. It's possible, we'll talk about the system automatically creating calendar records when you're printing reports, but if you print the report twice, you might get two items on the calendar for the same date that report was sent out. You don't need both. You can delete them directly here using the delete option. Click there. It's going to give you the confirmation. Do you want to delete this record? And then you say yes or no to delete it or not. Adding a calendar entry. There are a couple different ways of adding a calendar entry. If there aren't any records currently on file, let me get to one that doesn't have any. Then it's going to require a double left mouse click for drill down again, and it will open you up to a blank calendar entry for today's date. If there are entries on file, then you will need to use the down arrow key again on your keyboard for adding a new record. Slight variation because it's really technically a read-only grid, but the down arrow does work to open up automatically the calendar window so that you can input a record. Again, it defaults to today's date, and so we're on the 7th here of June. So any notes that I would put in here, and then hit save, and then exit this window, you'll notice that will come up then in the grid for that date. If I need to edit it, I can again do my double click, make any changes, press save again, and close it. Another option for adding as well is your main toolbar. Your main toolbar includes the record-specific calendar. Using this option will again bring up the calendar. Again, defaulting to today's date, I've got an entry in here, and so it brings that up. If I didn't have an entry for today's date, then pressing that calendar again still, well, it looks like it's always taking me to the last one that's on file. Okay. So yeah, it takes you to one that you have on file. If you want to go to today's date and input some information, you certainly can. And finally, if you're a keyboard user, the F9 on the keyboard does the same thing as the calendar button to bring up an entry. Oh, I do have one for today's date. That's why I was bringing it up. All of these have one for today's date. Okay. There's one that doesn't. So yeah, if I use the toolbar button, it brings me up to a blank entry for today's date, like I was saying. So a little bit about this calendar window. The left-hand side allows you to, of course, select what date you want to make the entry for. I can choose any date in the past or in the future using the drop-down list to navigate months or years, selecting the date, and then the section on the right, the main body here, is looking for whatever notes you want to save about the specific date. You can also set a priority. Priority allows you to do a couple different things. The Details tab of the contract window is going to show anything that's been assigned a high priority. And so anything 1 through 4 is going to show up in the Details tab of the contract window. We'll see that in just a moment here. Or if you choose Payment Instructions, that's going to show up in the Payment Entry window. We'll see that in just a moment as well. If you want to provide payment instructions such as do not accept checks. So you select your priority and choose Save. And you'll notice that will immediately fill in when it was created and who created it. And if someone else comes back later and updates it, there'll be a last updated information and who did it. And if it's something that requires completion, you may or may not check it as follow-up required. But if you do check it as follow-up required, then the system will be looking for someone to eventually come and complete it. And when it is completed, someone will fill in the date and time that it was completed, press Save. That will then indicate that it was completed and who completed it again. And if you need to use recurring calendar entries, something that happens each month or each week that you want to be on a recurring basis, you can specify recurring information as well. And we will talk a little bit more about the follow-up required option, particularly with work lists in another session. When you're in that calendar window, let me go to a specific record here so I can show you. You will notice that this particular borrower has 2 calendar notes for today that were entered. If I bring up his calendar, it's got them both in there. You will notice in the bottom right it indicates record 1 of 2. And when you're in this, which is effectively a data entry window, you've got some toolbar buttons that are available for you up on the main toolbar, including the scroll buttons. And so I can scroll to record 2 of 2 by hitting the next button, and it's going to take me to that record here if you have multiple date entries for the same date. Or if you want to add a new entry for the same date, you can press the new button up on the toolbar. It will start a new entry for that same date. Notice now we're 3 of 3 for today's date. I can enter my notes, save changes, and now we've got 3 entries for the same date. If I make any changes and want to cancel and go back to the previously saved state, cancel will take me back and also jump me off that record. But you notice it did not save those changes that I made. And of course, using the close button up here, like any other window, we'll close that window. We'll close the calendar window. We mentioned the priority messages. In this case, Kevin Adams has 2 priority messages, one that's low, one that's medium. The medium one's going to take priority over the low one, and so if we look at the Details tab, we're seeing that medium priority message directly here at the bottom. One cool feature with this is that we can double-click right on this entry. It will drill us down again to that entry here. This is looking for follow-up required, and so if I'm completing it today, I can go ahead and enter today's date as when it's being completed, save those changes, and now it's a completed item. It wouldn't show up on a work list any longer looking for it to be completed. And similarly, anything that's been set up as payment instructions is going to show up in the payment entry window. If I go to enter a payment, for example, for contract 1000 or 10003, Jim Carpenter, he's set up with payment instructions that say do not accept any personal checks. And so this is a flag to anybody doing payment entry that you're not supposed to accept checks from this borrower. They've bounced too many. So any payment instructions that you want to have, you can put in as payment instructions. Be aware that any priority messages will still take precedence. And so, for example, if we look at 10001, Ernie Johnson, he has a high priority message. But if we look at his contact notes, which we can access directly here in the payment entry window. Same thing as what we're seeing for him in his contract window. He's also got payment instructions that say do not accept personal checks. And so even though that's not being displayed, if I were to attempt to set this to personal checks, the software is going to say, hey, you're not supposed to accept personal checks for this borrower, and it's not going to let you do it. So I mentioned already the user calendar. This is a very powerful feature in the software because it does allow you to assign tasks to your various users. And so as a manager, it may be important to you to assign people that are going to be using Contract Collector various tasks throughout the day or for the week. You know, when they come in on Monday, you're going to want to have a list of tasks for them to accomplish. So that's where you're going to be using the user window, bringing up their user ID. We'll say me, Mike, and this is Mike Adams, and entering tasks for the day. So you can see that Mike has been assigned to attend the training at the Wildwood Seminar on both Thursday and Friday, June 7th and 8th. And so if I go and I log in to the software as Mike, I am going to get a message that comes up as soon as I log in that says, go out and check your calendar. You've got something on the calendar that you need to look at for today. And so when I go into the software, it's not automatically going to bring up my calendar, but I can use the keyboard shortcut, which is F6, to open up my specific calendar for my user ID, and it's going to bring me up to today's date, and here's what I'm supposed to do today. And so again, this might be multiple records. If you've got multiple date entries for the same date, then they'd be able to scroll through them. They may or may not be something that require actual follow-up and are looking for him to put in a completed date. So for example, if we were to log in as Stacy, Stacy doesn't have any appointments today, but she has an uncompleted task that required follow-up from a previous date, so she gets a message that says, hey, you still have these other items that need to be addressed. I close that. She can press F6 to open up her calendar, and at this point, running a report would probably be better for her to see what's not completed, but I happen to know that she has a task on June 1st, which was to call a real estate agent. She never got a completed date in here, and so it's going to keep bugging her until she does come out, actually mark that it's completed, and save that entry. Also with the dates, we have a powerful new feature, which we are calling the notification dashboard. It's under System Utilities. This notification dashboard includes a calendar tab, which has everything from the calendar, whether it's a user entry or whether it's for any one of your other record-specific calendars, including the contract window or the client. Any of your calendars are going to show up here. You can filter your list on various things to reduce what's displaying, and we are going to talk about this notification dashboard a little bit more again as well. The important things to note here again is if you got your drill down to open up these entries, that didn't open, I don't know why. There we go. To open up these entries in the calendar so that you can complete them or finish them. There's a follow-up column on here that indicates whether follow-up is required or not, and there's a completed column indicating when it was completed, if it was completed. And again, like any grid, you can sort on these columns with the double click. You can also drill down, which allows you the ability, if you want to then follow up on this contract and this calendar entry, we can bring up this contract window record right from here, make a phone call, bring up their phone information, call them, and then complete the calendar entry if it was something like you need to call this borrower on this date. For reports, we have first of all, the user calendar report, which will show specifically on your user calendar, any tasks, whether they need to be completed or not, and we'll list the priority. And so this is something that you can always run for any date range to see what your calendar entries are for a specific user. Again, very powerful as a manager if you're wanting to manage the tasks of your users. The other report that's commonly used is the record-specific calendar report. You can choose to run it for all calendars or specific calendars. I'll go ahead and just run it for all. And again, it's going to show all of the records on our calendar for that date range. And finally, for the calendars, you do have the ability to set up reports that you print to automatically create a calendar entry. So for example, if you're printing a delinquent report, or delinquent notice, printing a delinquent notice and sending it to the borrower, you may want that to show up on your calendar that you've sent them this delinquent notice. So on your other setup of your management company window, we have an option called Automatic Report Calendar Entries. If you save that and then go print a report, such as, like I said, the delinquent notice, and this does require that you print. If you just preview it, it's not going to create the calendar entry. But if I press print, and again, I'm not going to print it, I'll say cancel in this case, but you'd want to press print in the printer dialog to actually send it to your printer. If I now go look at any of my delinquent contracts here in the contract window, such as 1001, and look at their contact log, you will notice that there's a notice that was created. And I don't see it. I shouldn't be, but it may require that I log back in. So let me log back in. Some of those management company settings are a global setting that's set when you first log into the software, so I apologize. Let me try that one more time. Delinquent payment notice, and I choose print. And even if I cancel out of that, I should be able to go back to the contract window, calendar, and there's my notice entry that was created right here. I can edit it and put additional notes on here that we called them as well if you wanted to save those changes. But the software will create those calendar entries for you. But as you notice, it's important that you exit the software and log back in for some of those settings to take effect. And that's our calendar. Any questions on the calendar? Yes, that's correct. It is going to log anything that qualifies as a notice, anything that qualifies as a report. It's not. Generally speaking, everywhere throughout the software where we use the term report, it's for internal purposes, and in general, those are not going to create your calendar entries because they're for internal purposes. They're not to be sent out to the borrower. Anything that's indicated as a notice, that includes the statement of payments, the payment acknowledgement notice. Anything that ends in notice is generally something that is going to create that calendar entry for you. It's designed to be sent to the borrower, so it's going to be, if you print it, it will create that calendar entry for you. Good question. So like the other tabs we've seen, such as the UDF, images, and calendar tabs, the ledger tab is another tab that you're going to see in several of the data entry windows. It's not in all of them, though. And so in this case, the ledger tab is only in the client window, vendor window, contract window, and for lease collector in the lease window. So what the ledger is going to show you is basically the transactions that have occurred for the entity. In most cases, the contract window is going to show you the transactions that have happened for your borrowers. So to demonstrate again, I'm going to be working within the Enterprise Edition, which just has both the contract menu and the lease menu. But in the contract window, you have the ledger tab, and the ledger tab at the top has several search filters that you can use to define the items displayed in the list. And below that is your grid again, which has all of the functionalities of a grid, including your drill down, which is commonly going to be used to bring up particular journal records. And so very commonly you'll be using the display in the ledger to find whatever journal ID you're looking for, do your double click for your drill down to bring up that receivable in the receivable window so that this can be manipulated further or checked out. In the case of a late fee that you're deleting, you might be deleting the late fee, and so you'd be bringing it up here in the receivables journal window and then using the delete option to delete it. Because once again, the ledger grid is read-only, and so it simply allows you a tool to navigate. We did make a very recent change to the ledger. We added the payment number column, which I think will be very helpful in identifying which payment number a payment goes with. Before that was added, we always had to drill down to the journal ID to check it out. So I think that will be really powerful for the ledger tab. So along with these filters, you also have the ability to print the ledger here at the top, and we'll look at that a little bit more before we finish this session. The first filter here is the ledger display. The ledger display allows you to select all entries, open entries, the payment history, or if it's a loan that has escrow, the escrow payout history. The open entries will display just what's open. In this case, there's no past due balance, so there's no open entries. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Let me go to one that does have open entries. And so generally what you'll see is the past due balance will be reflected in your open ledger as the past due balance. This may not be true if they do have some charges that are due in the future. And so you may create a servicing fee or a legal fee that's due next month. That is going to show up as an open ledger entry, but it's not going to show up yet as past due until it reaches the past due date. So in some situations you may see a discrepancy, but typically the open ledger entries is a very good way to identify to your borrower what's past due. And so if they have a past due balance of $294, what makes up that balance? Well, it's made up by a $282 regular payment and a $12.50 escrow charge in this case. And so that can be really helpful to explaining what makes up that past due balance. Another one that's commonly used is the payment history to see, what is their list of payments. With this option, you might be using some of the check boxes down below to summarize by receipt numbers. What we're seeing in this case is because of the detailness of the ledger, it's showing this receipt number 30 up here 3 times because it paid, it was involved in 3 different entries. If I summarize by receipt entry, that will give me a little bit better idea of what actual payments they made. Now it's totaling these payment amounts. This is going to tie in with what we see on a statement of payments notice for the payments that they've made. And so using some of these options, like that summary by receipt number, can be helpful. There's also an option you'll see here to suppress backouts. If you've needed to do any backouts on this, you can certainly do that so that you don't have that mess that the backout creates. Generally, they would negate to 0, and so you can suppress those lines with that option. The other 2 filters that you see at the top are the bank type and the code type options. For the contract window, the bank types are operating, escrow, and other. And your code types are principal, interest, escrow, and fees. What you want to be careful with, it is possible to create mutually exclusive options. In other words, if I chose escrow here and principal and interest over here, there aren't going to be any results that fall into both. So you want to be a little bit careful. And you also want to be careful if you do choose one of these bank type or code type options. Generally, we recommend that you immediately set it back to all entries. What will happen is is you'll go to another record, maybe another day. The software is going to remember these settings that you chose, and so when you open up the software in a week from now, it's going to have whatever settings you last had in there. And if it's fees only, you may start looking at a bunch of blank ledgers, wondering where all your charges went. Why are they all blank? Well, you're only displaying fees and nobody has any fees. So that's a common technical support question we get. My ledger's gone. Well, no, your filters are hiding it. Change your filters. And generally speaking, bank type and code type should be set to all entries just so that you don't confuse yourself later on. And usually you want to see them all anyway, so they're not commonly used in most situations. And in the lease window, the ledger tab, you will notice those two options are slightly different. Instead of escrow, it's security for your security deposit. And in code type, again, you've got rent and security instead of principal and interest and escrow. So next to the code type, we have a date range option. This date range option allows you to filter on any particular date range. If you don't want to see, for example, all entries for a huge date range, maybe you only want to see May 1st through the end of June. We can filter that list on the date range option if we so choose to, again, help you find what you're looking for in your ledger to minimize some of these items that are being displayed. The Edit Ledger button in the lower left corner is then what you're going to use if you do need to make any edits to your ledger. We already talked about if you needed to delete an entry, you can drill down on it. You can also edit it using the Edit Ledger to create a new entry. So first of all, you might want to add a charge. For example, we can add a charge for today's date for, let's just say, a servicing fee of $100. We can then save that entry, and that's going to then show up on our ledger as still an open entry waiting for payment. And so now we've charged them $100 that the payment entry window is going to be looking to collect. This can be to create a manual late fee, a legal fee. There may be some circumstances when you need to recreate a regular payment and you choose to do it this way. Generally not. Generally the software does that for you in other places, and we'll look at that a little bit later. So that's the first thing you do with the Edit Ledger is add a new charge. The other thing that you can do with the Edit Ledger is adjust a charge. And so the adjusted charge will bring up all of your open ledger entries, and so there's the $100 that we just created. But let's say that I want to adjust that escrow, and we're going to reduce it $2.50 to bring it down to a, whoops, I'm going to adjust it negative. Oh, my mouse, it was doing so well. Okay, so we'll adjust it a positive 250. And save that entry. And then by default, it takes me up to a next entry if I want to adjust more. I can always just switch it back and exit. And so now we see that adjustment line, and the type column will indicate that it was an adjustment for 250 on this entry. And so now they owe $15 for their escrow for payment number 27. And finally, with the ledger, we have the ability to print the ledger. And so we have the ability to print it under the usual option of going to your lease menu, lease reports, and going to your contract menu, contract reports for the contract ledger, to go to the contract ledger report to print the ledger. But generally speaking, if you're already here and this is the ledger that you want to print, it's going to print it based on whatever filters that you've specified. And so it's just going to print what you're seeing displayed in your grid. You can choose the preview or print option from your main toolbar, having selected the appropriate report ID. And so again, here we've selected the report ID that we want to use. Generally, it's always going to be ledger. You can create different versions using forms maintenance. If you want to create your own versions of the ledger, we will discuss forms maintenance coming up as well. But once we've selected which one we want to do, simply press preview or print, and it prints the ledger exactly as you had it specified within the grid with whatever filters you selected. And so that's a printout of the ledger if you need that for your records or anything like that. All right, the next section is basic reporting features. We've already looked at them in a little bit, but there are quite a number of reports throughout the software that you can use to output the information that you've put into your data entry windows in a report format. So going to the software, I'm going to go ahead and log in as just a professional edition. So in the contract reports menu, you have the contract report, which is just your general contract listing report. All of your reporting screens or notice windows are generally very similar to this one for selecting your filters so that you can output the information that you're looking to output. We talked about the pick lists. So the pick lists are what you're going to use first to identify what kind of records you're looking to output. If you're looking to just create a report for one portfolio or select portfolios, you can select your portfolio filters using your F2 or your F8 functions for your portfolio to select which portfolios you want to report. So if I go F8 and then select one or more of my groups, that's going to fill that in with the portfolios for that group. And you may also be using your selection drop-down lists if you want to do it for certain criteria versus other criteria. Once you've selected generally the contracts or the portfolio filters that you want, most reports also allow you to filter on a date range. Some allow the option or not. For in this case of the contract report, we can do the date range based on their begin date, their next payment dates. If they have a same as cash payoff date, when their payment and full date will be, or if they did a write-off, maturity date, things like that, you can run a filter on that. So we'll just say begin date, and then specify your date range that you want to run it for. Also commonly used with payment dates. If you're looking to see what payments were made in a particular date range, you would be setting those date range filters. Many of the reports allow you to designate a report order. Generally the default is fine. If you need to choose a different report order, there are usually several different ones to choose from depending on how you want to sort your report. Some of the reports, such as the AP report or the AR report for your receivables and your payables, some of those will allow a secondary sort order as well as the primary sort order as well. Once you've set the order, then you usually have a couple of different report type options. Typically, most reports will include a summary and or detailed report option. Generally, this will affect the fields that are printed on the report. So for example, the summary report, if I preview that, I've already set too many criteria here. Let me go back to none. Sorry, I preview that report. It brings up the designated columns that are set to come up on the summary report, which is going to be slightly different typically than the columns that come up on the detail report. You can see there's quite a few more columns there. We've even changed to the portrait, from portrait to landscape for our page layout. And so we have, all of our reports have different out-of-the-box settings for what columns are going to default on those reports. Choosing summary or detailed gives you a few different options. Many of our reports also have the ability to become a notice. Again, once they become a notice, now they're more designed for external purposes to be sent out, in this case, to the borrower. And so this can be used to create a letter or an actual contract that they'll be signing, anything like that. And so if I choose one of these options and choose the preview, it'll bring up that letter format that's designed, again, to be sent to the borrower as a notice. And you notice as soon as I change it to notice, the caption up here changed as well. If I changed it back to the summary report, it would indicate that we're now back in the contract report versus the contract notice. Many reports also include page break options. And so typically a checkbox that allows you to specify that you want a page break. If I now preview this report, instead of getting just one page, I'm now getting multiple pages. And I can scroll through those pages using the print preview toolbar, and each portfolio is now on a separate page. This could be useful if they need to go to separate files in your file cabinet and need to separate them by page. Finally, the good stuff, the output options. You have quite a number of output options that you can use to preview or print or save it to a file or PDF, anything like that. And you have a number of different ways of accessing those options. The primary methods are going to be up on your main toolbar. You have the preview and print options to preview it to the monitor or to send it to the printer. You also have those, all of those same options available through your right mouse click shortcut, including preview and print and save report as to save it as a PDF file. The main toolbar also, I might add, includes this drop-down list, which adds those other ones, the save report as, and so forth. And your toolbar for reporting features can also be extended. If there are features that you use that you would like to add to the main toolbar, such as maybe save report as, if you're always saving a report to a PDF file, you can add that toolbar function to your reporting section of your main toolbar. So that you can use that with just a few less mouse clicks than if it were anywhere else. And so that will bring up the save report as options to save it as an Excel file or a PDF, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Also, your file menu includes your preview and print, if you prefer to access it that way. And the final option, again, is your reporting menu, which is added to the toolbar as soon as I opened up a reporting screen. All of those functions are in there. So there should be some way of accessing it that's convenient for you. Just whatever your preference is just fine. Most people, I would think, use the main toolbar, but a lot of people like the shortcut menu as well because it's directly associated with the window that they're in. So as we also have just seen, when you preview to the monitor, it opens up, along with the preview, it opens up a toolbar. And so you'll notice that as soon as I opened this preview, it opened this toolbar that goes with this report. This includes the options for me to change pages, so I can view each of the pages that are coming up on this report. And it also includes a close button. Many people always like to use this X. That closes just the toolbar. They now then have to press this X or even find this X. If it's maximized, then it's way up here in the upper right-hand corner. It can be hard to see to close the report. So anytime you're doing a preview, we always recommend using the close button. It saves you a couple mouse clicks and is just more convenient. If you want to send it directly to the printer, you've liked the output, you're ready to print it. Any report that requires an extensive amount of calculations can take some amount of time for it to come up. You can save having the software to recalculate again just by pressing the printer icon to send it directly to the printer. And the other option that you've got with this toolbar is zoom. If we wanted to make it bigger, so that it's a little bit easier to read, we can zoom in and make it a larger font. And now that's a lot easier to read and is a lot bigger. Usually 100% is fine. And finally, I guess there's one more option, that's the jump to page. If you have a large printout and you know you want to go out to page 6 or page 10 or page 80, you can jump right to that page using the go to page option, which gives you a page number. This one's only 2 pages, so I better not go very far. So that's the print preview toolbar. The other option that's commonly used is the Save Report As. This allows you to save it as a PDF file. It also allows you to export it to Excel. And there's generally two different ways that you can export to Excel. You can export the complete format, which takes a slight bit longer to create. So if I say OK to that, that didn't take too long. Report's coming up here. It should open automatically. And what the complete format does is everything. All the report formatting, all of your dates, and all the formatting that you have on, just like if you were to preview it. If you do the simple format, so let me export that again. And this time I will choose the simple format. This is just going to export the column information. And so the file already existed, so I said yes to overwrite. And it just brings up your raw data for those columns. It does put a column heading so that you kind of know what each of those columns is for. But it includes none of the formatting. There's no page numbers. There's no titles, and so forth. Some of your other output options do include sending it to a web page if you're wanting to maybe post it to your website so that people can access the information on your website. Maybe you have a secure login so that because most of what Contract Collector has is sensitive information. But if you do want to create any reports to a web page, you can do that, and the software will create that for you. And you can export it to like a comma to limited format for import into another software. And so if you're using an accounting package or just another program that you want to move information to out of Contract Collector, you can export to like a comma to limited format and then import into the other product. And we will also discuss email a little bit later on, but that just obviously allows you the ability to email these letters, notices, or reports to people. And finally, just to wrap up, like I was saying, the Save Report As is also most commonly used for PDF format. It's a popular format for sending reports in. It can't be edited generally by the end user, and so for legal reasons, it provides an acceptable format for legal documents and things like that you might not want anybody else to edit. And if we go ahead and just save this as a PDF file, by default it's going to open up that report in Adobe PDF. And then you can email this file or put it in one of your folders, and then even connect it to your record if you want to connect it to your images file like we saw earlier. All right, the next section will be on the advanced reporting features. I should note the advanced reporting features are only available in the professional and in the enterprise edition of Contract Collector. Many of these features will not be available if you're on a standard edition or below. So in Contract Collector, the advanced reporting features are available up on your main toolbar when you press the advanced button, which is the light bulb button, also accessed through your right mouse click shortcut. You can click on advanced, and that opens up the advanced section. This section allows you to do a wide variety of things. The first of all is control the font size. So you can choose, in our drop-down list we have a limited list of commonly used fonts for most reports, Times New Roman, Arial, and Courier. You do have the ability to choose from your full list of fonts from your computer by pressing the F2 key or your right mouse click. That will open up your fonts menu so that you can select any font, say OK, choose your font size. We'll go font size 10, and then preview this report. And it's going to use that font size that you designated to print that report. Most everything will follow the font. Sometimes the upper right-hand corner and upper left-hand corner, as you can see here, remain the same. but everything else followed the font that you designated. Along with that font size, you can also, I'm going to set this back to Times New Roman and 8. You can also control whether it's portrait or landscaped. For example, again, the detail report by default will print landscaped. I can force it back to portrait and preview that. And what you're going to see is it's going to put those columns on there, but because there's not enough room on the portrait layout for that, we've wrapped around to a second line. You may see this commonly. We've tried to prevent this on most of our out-of-the-box reports. It will vary a little bit based on your data because actually each report is created on the fly as far as each column width. And so based on your data, we set these column widths. So in your case, if you've got a really, really long name, it's possible that some of your reports that include that name may wrap around to a second line. That's when using the advanced reporting to maybe remove a column that's not important to you so that you can prevent this column wrap. It's going to be easier to read the report, which of course now you can do with the advanced section. You set it on landscaped, and now we prevent that column wrap because now we've got room for those extra columns. This is a little bit easier to read than the other format, so that may be helpful to you. The next thing is the fields available list. And so as you can see, each of our out-of-the-box reports includes a designated set of fields that will print on that report. If you don't use escrow, many of our reports do include an escrow column. It's going to be beneficial for you to remove those columns and put something on that report that's a little bit more meaningful to you. I can go ahead and remove a couple of these columns here. And then I've got this large list of available fields to choose from, again, including all of those UDF fields that you may have created that you can choose from to add to your report. And so you can select something that you want to have appear on the report. And now if you preview, it's got that description column added on there for your report. Another option that you have is the ability to center the report. Not often used. Usually it's best if it's left aligned, which is the default. But if you do want to center it, there may be times when that might look better for whatever you need it for. So you can center the main body of the report so those columns will appear centered. There may be instances where that's useful, but generally not. And then you'll also notice that there's a report ID option. This report ID option allows you to save these settings. And so once you've got this set up the way that you want it to, if it is something that you're going to be reusing on a common basis, particularly if it involved a lot of setup down here as far as selecting which fields you wanted to remove and which ones you wanted to add, you're not going to want to do that each time. So you can designate a report ID, give it a description so that you kind of know what it's for. And then using the Save button up on your top toolbar, save those changes. So that's going to save these report settings that you had in there so that you don't have to set it up each time. And you'll notice if I close that report and a couple days later or a couple minutes later I come back to that report, it's defaulting to that report that you last used. And so you'll notice, even though I haven't gone into my advanced section over here, it's got listing 01 up here on your top toolbar for the report ID as the report that it's going to use. If I preview this report without even going into the advanced settings, it's used my report as I last saved it. These settings are remembered per user ID, and so this is created out there for everybody to use, but it won't be their default until they go in and actually preview or print that report, at least for the first time. And then from that point forward, it will be remembered for them because it is user ID specific. So once again, going into the advanced, the one thing that I haven't talked about so far, well, actually, finally, with those fields available list, after you add and remove, you do have the ability to move them up and down. And so I can move them up and down within my fields to print list here if I want them to print in a slightly different spot. So you can move those around with those up and down buttons, and then once again save your changes. Notice that I can continue to save changes on this report until I create a hard copy of it. and we'll look at that in just a moment here. But right now, because there's no physical hard copy that's been created, it's all still dynamic. I can make any changes, and I continue to save changes as needed. Using this Modify Report button, I've got a few more options allowed. Actually, I've got pretty much an unlimited number, because this will open up the Report Designer, which really allows me very direct control over how this report is operating. There are two types of report modifications, temporary modifications and permanent modifications. And the difference is in which buttons up here I push on the main toolbar. So for right now, I've checked the Modify Report form, and if I press the Preview button, this is going to be a temporary modification. We can tell that it's a temporary modification because in the upper left-hand corner here, if you can read this, it's got a temporary file name, which is always going to be the letter P and then 7 numbers. These are just 7 random numbers that were generated by the system. This is a temporary file. This is not going to be permanently saved. And so I can go in here, I can make any changes that I want to make using the Report Designer. I can remove some of these fields that I don't want. I can move this caption, and I can even go in here under my font settings, format font. And again, I can choose from my entire array of fonts on my computer and font sizes and say OK. And then when I close this report, and it doesn't matter if I go File Save or whether I choose this X, it's going to give me, do you want to save this? But it's saving it as a temporary file name. You'll notice it's got that same letter P and those numbers as it indicated in the upper left, that it's a temporary file name. I say yes to save changes. It's now used my settings that I used in Report Designer to make those changes. If I close this preview, uncheck this Modify checkbox, hit Preview again, you'll notice our changes were not saved. The changes that we've made, we've now gone back to the default layout. It was a temporary modification because all we did was hit the checkbox and we hit the Preview button. If we do it slightly differently, to make a permanent modification, the first thing that you have to do is you have to have a report ID assigned. You check the checkbox, and then instead of pressing Preview, you're pressing the Save button. So the Save is going to create a permanent modification. It's going to create a hard copy of this report at this point. So I press the Save button. It brings up the same Report Designer that I saw before. I can go ahead and remove these. I will go ahead and change my format font to set a new font for this caption. And large font size, make it a little bit bigger so it doesn't get cut off. Real quickly, I'm going to go ahead and remove those fields, and I'm also going to drop an image on here. We'll talk a little bit more about images and letterhead later on. But I use my Report Controls toolbar. I select a picture. I drop a picture on there. I select my picture again. I'm going to go to my images file and use the Graveco image, say OK, make it a little bit bigger. And it's never going to get really big because there's not a lot of room there. Now when I close, it asks me, do you want to save changes? And notice now it's got my permanent file name in there. It says list01.frx. And the upper left-hand corner, as before, now indicates list01 instead of that temporary file name like we had before. I say yes to save my changes. And notice now it doesn't bring it up in Preview, but I can turn off the Modify, choose Preview, and there are my changes. And so it's created a permanent copy of that called list01. And again, if I close that report, I can come back to it. It's defaulting to list01. I simply hit Preview, and notice my changes are still there. It's got my logo in the upper left-hand corner, and it's got my font changes. It's created a permanent copy of that of those modifications. Also notice that as soon as we did that, as soon as we chose that save, we hard-coded all these options. And so now all these options that we had down here below are no longer editable. I can't remove or add columns. I can't change my format. I can't change font here. If I wanted to make any modifications, I now have to use the modify report form. I can still choose preview and make a temporary modification of what else I do. For example, let's remove this so that there's no heading at all. And notice the temporary file name, I say yes, and now it's brought it up without the report. But now if we go back, it's back because that was a temporary modification. I can still make more permanent modifications just by pressing the save button. It's going to warn me, are you sure that you want to overwrite what you had before? We say yes to continue. Well, I think I said yes. Let's try that again. So I say save. Are you sure you want to continue? I say yes. Okay, now it's, oh, I don't have modify checked. Now if I check modify, and now if I press save, it asks me the message, okay, my fault. The software is always right. Not always. But it brings up my modifications. Now if I make any modifications to this, such as maybe I want to remove this, it asks me if I want to save those permanent modifications to my list 01. I say yes. I can uncheck that checkbox, open that, and now that information is permanently removed. Questions on the advanced reporting? The question was, is it possible to delete a saved report ID once it's been created? So if I wanted to delete this list 01, is there any way to delete it? Yes. Actually, using the delete button right here on the main toolbar will give me the option to delete that. It should give me a confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete this saved report? I can say yes to this, and it will permanently delete it. The other way is that this becomes a forms maintenance report at the point in time when I saved it as a permanent. When I made my permanent modifications with that save button, it created a record for me in forms maintenance. It can be deleted from here as well. Again, the forms maintenance is just a data entry window. Choose delete, and I can delete the record here as well to delete the saved reports. So you can clean them up if there are ones that you don't use anymore to get them out. Good question.